Beam Weeks here again, and today I am bringing you another musically inspired video. This one is going to be dealing with 10 great heavy metal and hard rock debut albums. Now, these are not the top 10 like with my previous video. I'm not ranking them, not a top 10, although these fit closely to the 10 greatest in my opinion. There are some other albums that are not in this list that I find great as well. The Doors' first album, the first Jimi Hendrix album. These are great albums. They're not in this list here today, but I think you'll like the ones that I do have if you're a heavy metal and hard rock fan. So the first one I'm gonna introduce is at number 10. Tesla, Mechanical Resonance, from Sacramento, California. These guys came out in 1986, I believe this one came out. And right from the get-go, you just knew that these dudes were just great rock and roll. Nothing flashy. They weren't doing the big hair and the spandex and all of that like some of the bands. More closer aligned with the sound of AC/DC. Tesla, I think their first 3 or 4 albums were really good, really solid. After that, they were, okay. I mean, I've got a few of the later ones too, but this one right here just really kicked ass. Easy Come, Easy Go. That's the one that started the album off. Coming at You Live. For years, that was the first song they did in concert. Getting Better, Too Late for Love, Rock Me to the Top, We're No Good Together, and of course, Modern Day Cowboy, kick-ass tune. Changes, Little Susie, Love Me, Cover Queen, and Before My Eyes. These are just rock-solid tunes. They had several years in the clubs honing the songs that became this first album, as do pretty much all of these other bands. That's the cool thing about it, is they wrote these songs and spent 2, 3, 4 years playing clubs and just honing these songs and getting them to be the classics that they are. So, number 10, Tesla, Mechanical Resonance. Now, my next one. I saw these guys in concert in 1983. They opened for Iron Maiden on the Peace of Mind tour. And this was actually kind of a super group. Although when they went in to record this, the bass player got called back to his previous group, so he opted to go that route. But I'm talking about the incredible Fastway. This was just a stellar album. Fast Eddie Clarke and Pete Way, hence Fastway, put the band together. Fast Eddie came from Motorhead. You had Pete Way from UFO and Jerry Shirley on drums from Humble Pie. Just an incredible drum player. And Dave King, relatively unknown guy on vocals at that time. He was unknown. He's just got a great blues rock voice. And they put together this incredible album here in 1983. And before they got into the studio, Pete Way, UFO, he came from UFO. And UFO had disbanded or went on hiatus. So he joined up and put this together with Fast Eddie. But then before they got into the studio to record this, Pete got the call that UFO was getting ready to do something. So he ended up taking that route and going back to UFO. But this still remains one of the great debut albums from a band, from a hard rock, heavy metal band. It starts off with Easy Livin'. Then it's got Feel Me, Touch Me, Do Anything You Want, All I Need Is Your Love, Another Day, Heft, which is just a great vibey tune. Great drumming on it. That opening guitar riff just kind of hangs in the air. Just a great song, great album. We Become One, Give It All You Got, Say What You Will. Everybody knows that. Anybody that's listened to metal and hard rock over the last 40 years, they know what that song is. You Got Me Running, Give It Some Action, and the bonus track, Far From Home. That bonus track on the album, the vinyl album that first came out in '83, it was the 10 tracks, and then the bonus track was a 45 single inserted into the album. To get that bonus track, that was kind of one that was added on after they had completed the album, and they just thought, it's a great song. Why throw it away? Why leave it sit around for the next album? And their next album was pretty cool too, as was the third album. And they did the soundtrack to the movie Trick or Treat, and that's the one that had Skippy from Family Ties in it, played Ragman. But that was pretty much their last really good album. After that, I think they went a little poppy, the lineup changes, and eventually David King left, and it wasn't the same. But for that moment, when this album came out, this is one that you should have if you're into the hard rock and the heavy metal. Now, my next one is it's a really good debut album. This band has put out many, many more albums that are just way better than this. It's a case of these guys getting better and better as they went along. And I'm, of course, talking about the mighty Megadeth. Killing is my business and business is good. This one just showed you Dave was serious. He got kicked out of Metallica, and he was ready to take on the world. And he was going to show you that he's not going to just play the same kind of music that he played with Metallica. And he didn't. He made Metallica and Megadeth are two totally different bands with two totally different sounds, and that's what's cool. So the cool thing about that split is that we got two great bands out of it instead of one. This one has Last Rites, Loved to Death, Killing is My Business and Business is Good, Skull Beneath the Skin, These Boots. Now These Boots, that's a cover tune. It's the old Tina Sinatra song. Interesting fact, after a certain period of time, after the 80s, if you bought it in the 90s, this album, that song had one of these censorship beeps running through it. And the reason is because the guy that Lee Hazelwood wrote the song. I don't know if you're familiar with Lee Hazelwood. He did a lot of really cool non-rock, but really cool albums with Tina Sinatra. They sang a lot of duet albums back in the late 60s. And very Sonny and Cher-esque, but really cool stuff. I've got some. But he wrote the song These Boots, and he wrote it for Tina Sinatra. And he was making money off of this album when it came out in the 80s, and I bought it. Mine's from the 80s, so there's not that beep through it. But when he heard some of the lyrical changes that Dave Mustaine had made to it, he got offended and demanded that they pull it off, and it would have been too much to pull it off the album, so they just ran a censorship beep through it. So if you own a copy and that's what's going on with it, now you know why. But then they had Rattlehead, Chosen Ones, Looking Down the Cross, and of course Mechanics. Mechanics, for those of you who are familiar with this album, is the Four Horsemen from Metallica. Dave wrote that whole melody, that whole riff, that's his. And it was originally called the Four Mechanics. And then Metallica, Hetfield, kind of changed the lyrics around when they recorded it and called it the Four Horsemen. And Mustaine decided to drop the four part, and it was just Mechanics. But it's basically the same song other than different lyrics and a different vocalist. So that's another great debut album. These guys helped change metal in the mid-'80s. This one's 85, I believe. And it still rocks. But like I said, I mean, Megadeth's got so many great albums that are better than that, but that's still one to have. And this one dips into the 1990s. I immediately, when you hear that first opening riff to one of the tracks that's on the radio even to this day, you know who it is. I'm talking about Alice in Chains, Facelift. Man in the Box. Man in the Box is just, wow. That riff, when you hear it, wow, 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 everybody knows it. You know who it is, and you always crank it up. But this album has some really good songs on it. We Die Young, Man in the Box, Sea of Sorrow, Bleed the Freak, I Can't Remember, Love, Hate, Love. It Ain't Like That, Sunshine, Put You Down, Confusion, I Know Something About You, and Real Thing. Lane Staley, he was at the top of his game with this stuff. This is before the heroin really took over and basically destroyed the guy. I think Dirt is a better album. I think Dirt is their masterpiece, although the Alice in Chains self-titled album is just a brilliant thing. So this is another one that you would want to have in your collection if you don't already. And a lot of these are old, so most of them are old, so you may already have these. I may just be preaching to the choir, but a great album nonetheless. And the next one, I remember hearing the Rollin'. You know the opening track. I'm talking Skid Row, Youth Gone Wild. That first time you hear the song Youth Gone Wild, that the producer in the studio saying rolling, and the rolling tape it meant, and that song was one of those that was like, all right, this is kind of cool. I like this, but that wasn't the one that really grabbed hold of me, and but it was enough to get me to take a listen to the rest of this album, and I'm glad I did, because I bought it like maybe 2 weeks after it came out. Another friend had it, and I got to borrow it and listen to the whole thing. And you got Piece of Me, Can't Stand the Heartache, Sweet Little Sister, Big Guns, Rattlesnake Shake, Youth Gone Wild, Here I Am, Making a Mess, and I Remember You. Everybody knows 18 in Life and I Remember You, because they're big radio hits still to this day in my area. At least it's played on the radio. But these guys, when they went in to record this, they had a different guy who was singing, and he laid down the vocals. And then they caught this guy, Sebastian Bach, who was singing for a band called Madam X. And they had seen him, and they liked his voice, and they figured he was a better fit. But if you want to know what the original sounds like with the original singer, you can go onto YouTube and find that, because they got all these tracks with him still singing it, and you can tell they made the right decision by bringing in Sebastian. I'm a big Skid Row fan for this album, but even bigger for Slave to the Grind. Better album, heavier, raw. I love that heavy raw stuff, and a lot better. I think after that, the third album, it was okay, and then it was pretty much downhill from there with the infighting and Sebastian Bach being kicked out. And they got some new singer. They brought in 3 or 4 different guys now since Bach's been gone. It doesn't do it for me. Not a fan without Sebastian Bach on vocals. And it's the same way with Queensryche. If Jeff Tate's not there, not interested, unless you change the name, because it's not Skid Row. If you want to still make a go of it, change the name, come up with something else. And but anyway, this one's a great album to have if you don't already have it. And it's the 30th anniversary, I think, of this. Yeah, it's the 30th anniversary, and I know that they had released an anniversary album version of it, but they didn't do anything special with it, which really sucks. They should have, not remastered, don't touch it, keep it as it is, but you have some, maybe some leftover tracks, put it out on vinyl, and instead they just, here's the 25th or 30th anniversary, it's a download, and it just wasn't the same. So they lost an opportunity there. My next one is one of those that a lot of people are going to say is played out, and I agree. There's some tracks on there that are played out, and then there's some that you're just not going to hear on the radio that are not played out, and this is why I still love to crank this one up. Even the ones that are on the radio, I still crank them up because they just rock. And I'm talking about Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction. Came out in 87, I believe it was, yeah. And this was one that, it didn't take off right away. It was one that, this album actually languished for about a year. They had released it, and they were out touring. They opened for Motley Crue on many dates, and then they played some other gigs with some other people. And it wasn't until the song in the video for Sweet Child of Mine came out that it really kicked this one into orbit. One of the biggest selling albums of the 80s. Certainly in the top 100 biggest selling albums of all times. And it's got some great songs. Welcome to the Jungle, It's So Easy, Night Train, Out to Get Me, Mr. Brownstone. Paradise City, that's another one that once that hit video and it got heavy rotation, just pushed this to sell even more. My Michelle, Think About You, Sweet Child of Mine, You're Crazy, Anything Goes, and Rocket Queen. Now everybody knows the story behind Guns N' Roses. They shot to the forefront and wasn't too long before drugs, alcohol, and infighting tore the band apart. And that's, was a shame because that original 5-man lineup with Adler on drums, not Matt Sorum, and there's nothing wrong with Matt Sorum. Matt Sorum's a great drummer and seems to be a decent guy, and I consider him a Guns N' Roses guy. But if I'm going to see the original, if I'm going to see that reunion show, man, I want Adler back there on drums, and I want Izzy Stradlin on rhythm guitar. But Izzy's done with it. He won't be back. He played a few shows during the reunion tour there, the Not in This Lifetime tour. But had these guys stuck together and were able to overcome all the infighting and all the bullshit that goes with the drugs and the alcohol, and I think they would have probably had 2, 3, 4 more great albums in them. But who knows? Maybe they'll put some stuff out here now that they're back together, with some of them at least. Now this one, I've got it at number 4 on my list here. Probably higher on some people's lists and lower on other people's lists. This one started it off for this band as a debut album does. But I think with the next album, the second album and on, they just completely changed the face of metal. This one right here was just their introductory. Hi, how you doing? We are fucking Metallica. And Kill 'Em All is still one of my all-time favorite albums. I love this. But of the first original 4 albums that kick ass, this one's number 4 for me. But it's on this list because it's their debut. I love Master of Puppets. To me, it's a masterpiece. If you saw my other video, then you know when I'm telling you this. That is the greatest metal album ever. Ride the Lightning and Justice for All are better than this, but this is what started it. This is these guys were kids. I mean, late teens, early 20s when they started putting all this stuff together. Hit the Lights, the Four Horsemen, which go back to the Megadeth album that was originally for Mechanics and then on to Mechanics for Mustaine. Motor Breath, Jump in the Fire, Anesthesia, Pulling Teeth, a great bass solo. Who does that? Who puts a bass solo on their albums other than Man of War? This is the only other band I know that put a bass solo on, although I think there's a couple others I can pull out of my memory if I gave it time. But usually it's a guitar solo, not with these guys. It was Cliff Burton was just that kind of a player. He played the bass like it was a guitar, like it was a lead instrument. Whiplash, Phantom Lord, No Remorse, Seek and Destroy, Metal Militia. A classic 80s metal album, a great debut. I'm going to take a little sip here. A little iced tea. Before getting to the number 3. This one, I'm just going to tell you right now, it's Black Sabbath, the very first Black Sabbath. Great album. I originally had the Paranoid album first. I got that in the late 70s when I was 11, 12, 13, somewhere in that age range. I got Paranoid. Oh, I was paranoid. No, I got the album Paranoid. And then I ended up getting this next. This was the second one that I got. And I remember putting this on, and this is one of these scare the shit out of you albums when you're 12, 13 years old. And that was meant to be like that. It's like a horror movie. That scariness. This one is dark and heavy and gloomy and very metal. And this is one of the original metal albums right here. I say one of the, I don't believe this is the original. Blue Cheer actually had some stuff that was more metal early on than this, although this is definitely heavier than anything Blue Cheer did, but Blue Cheer had some. And if you're not familiar with Blue Cheer, go check out some of their stuff from the mid to late 60s. Kick-ass stuff. But Black Sabbath, this was these guys just getting started, and they were horror movie fans and whatnot, and they added that element. Nobody had done that before. This came out during the hippie era, when it's all peace and love and sunshine and incense and peppermints and sunshine and lollipops and all that stuff, they come out with Black Sabbath, The Wizard, Behind the Wall of Sleep, NIB, Evil Woman, Sleeping Village, and Warning. This is just a great, gloomy chunk of metal. And without this, we probably wouldn't have many of the other bands that followed who cite this and this band as their main influence, including the previous mentioned Metallica. So if you don't have this one, and most metalheads do, get it. Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath. My number 2 goes back to the same era, a year before, and this one was the one that set the course for the mighty Led Zeppelin. My all-time favorite band. This album is a hard rock masterpiece. This one showed us that these guys were going to be around and have a say for a long time. And all these many years later, though they are still not functioning as a band, they still have a foot in the game, so to speak. Good Times, Bad Times, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, You Shook Me, Dazed and Confused, Your Time Is Gonna Come, Black Mountainside, Communication Breakdown, I Can't Quit You, Babe, and How Many More Times. The musicianship on this is just par excellence. There's nothing on here that's pop. The Beatles, greatest band of that era, arguably one of the greatest bands of all time. Love those guys. Certainly in my top, probably 5 or 6 all-time, all kinds of music bands. They're not hard rock or heavy metal. They touched on it, but these guys, I think, showed you that you don't have to have that hit single. This was all about the album, whereas the Beatles were writing just great singles, great songs. Although they do have great albums, don't get me, mistake me on that one. So this is my second favorite from my favorite band. So who could be number 1? Well, in my humble opinion, and that's just my opinion, I'm entitled to it, the greatest debut album ever recorded was the one that so thoroughly changed the game of hard rock and heavy metal from what it had previously been before this to what it came afterward, and I am talking about Van Halen. Van Halen 1, Running with the Devil, Eruption, You Really Got Me, Ain't Talking About Love, I'm the One, Jamie's Crying, Atomic Punk, Feel Your Love Tonight, Little Dreamer, Ice Cream Man, and On Fire. I remember the first time I heard this, and I talked about this album in my last video, the top 10 essential metal and hard rock albums. This was on that list. In fact, this is the only carryover from that list. But it's just that good. It was that much of a game changer. You got before Van Halen and after Van Halen. And you can, anybody that was around during that era, in the late 70s, if you were a teenager or close to being a teenager or in your early 20s and you were into the hard rock and the heavy metal, you know what I'm talking about. This was the one, this changed everything. Prior to this, it was, Tony Iommi. It was Eric Clapton and Cream, those heavy guitar players with the heavy chord structures and all that. Nobody was doing what Edward Van Halen was doing on guitar with the tapping and the hammer-ons and just, some incredible stuff. The whole sound that he got from that guitar, nobody did that before him. And I know people are going to want to argue, well, this person and that person, Schenker was doing some great stuff. Michael Schenker was doing some kick-ass stuff. So was Robin Trower. But I'm telling you, those guys were not even doing this stuff. And this is what changed it. And it changed it for the better. After this, you started having that Southern California guitar sound, which was your Eddie Van Halen and your Randy Rhoads. Although Randy was more classically inclined. Then you had George Lynch, Warren DeMartini, Jake E. Lee, just a whole ton of these guys that came out of Southern California, and they picked up on the sound. Hey, it's working for Eddie, let me try some of this stuff. But I think any metalhead has this. If you don't, Are you really a metalhead? Just kidding. But you should have it. It's, to me, it's like I said, it's the greatest debut album of all time. And this is Van Halen. So, there you go. I've got a couple more lists that I'm going to put together for some totally different stuff. And I'll be putting those videos up before too long. If you have some better debut albums, put them in the comments down below, and let's see what you come up with. I know like I said, there are others that are better, or not better, but there are others that could be on this list as well. I love the Doors. I love that first Doors album, and I debated about putting that on. Came close to it, but I didn't, because it really doesn't doesn't fit that hard rock, heavy metal category. The Doors defy category, honestly. Just a great band. And maybe I'll do a video about the Doors. I'm a big Doors fan. I also thought about putting the Hendrix on there, and Def Leppard's first album. Okay, great album. That made the list, but it got booted off by Tesla. So I kind of, made a list of about 15 or 20 and then whittled it down. Maybe I'll do a second list sometime. I don't know. But if you like the video, hit the thumbs up. If not, hit the thumbs down. Whatever. I'm not doing this for that. But if you have a better list for debut albums, post it below. Be glad to hear from you.